On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus is joining me. We are discussing the orange and white game and 11 Texas Longhorns drafted over the weekend.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. But today's episode is also brought to you by Pro Football Focus. I got Max Chadwick joining me today. Max, you cover football, and now we are in that weird spot for some people where there's no football, right? It's dominated by basketball and baseball moving forward. So what are your plans until college football jumps off again?
Man, it's actually like, first of all, thanks for having me on, but it's kind of like a happy new year for me as a college football analyst, because right after the season's over, we all at PFF kind of shift over to draft focus. So from basically February until now, I've been focused solely on the NFL draft pretty much. But now that it's over, the draft's over, I can finally shift my focus back over to college football and preview the 2024 season, which is what I love doing the most, honestly. So it's kind of like a happy new year for me once the NFL draft is over, kind of.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Good to hear. So, speaking of getting back into college football, a little bit less than 2 weeks ago, Texas had their orange and white game. A lot of people excited about what this team can do in 2024 in their inaugural season in the SEC. Of course, as the host of Locked On Longhorns, I'm over the moon in terms of what I expect from Steve Sarkisian moving into the SEC this year. We saw the orange and white game, ton of talent on both sides, but I think everybody would agree that the talk of the town that day was Arch Manning. I mean, you talk about 19 to 25 passes, 355 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 of those touchdowns going for 75 plus yards to DeAndre Moore and Isaiah Bond. What was your takeaway from watching Arch Manning that day in the orange and white game on April 20th?
He looked fantastic, honestly. He looked like the guy who's the number 1 overall recruit coming out of high school a couple years ago now. So I know a lot of people were always kind of debating whether or not you should have been the number 1 overall recruit, obviously, or was it just because he's the son of a Manning? No, I think it's because he's a really talented kid. And honestly, you mentioned 6 incompletions. I think one of his incompletions was one of his best throws of the day, honestly, was one of the receiver drop right on the goal line. So I was really impressed by Arch Manning. And, if Quinn struggles at all this upcoming season, I think that there are going to be a lot of Longhorn fans that are going to be clamoring for Arch Manning to get in. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic to have Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning next year. And I think if Arch Manning needs to play next year, if Quinn gets hurt again, I think he'd be very capable to be their starting quarterback, I think.
Yeah, so let's knock on wood for Quinn's health for sure. Hopefully
Right.
we don't have a Spencer Rattler, Caleb Williams situation, and hopefully, let's just hope we don't have that. Hopefully Quinn is our quarterback this year. But I'm glad that you brought up both of them because, Texas is in an interesting situation that they haven't been in a long time, maybe ever, right? Where, well, I wouldn't say ever, but, Quinn Ewers, likely is going to be a first-round pick going into the draft this year. A lot of eyes on him as, one of the top quarterbacks taken in the 2024 NFL draft, 2025. But Arch Manning will be draft eligible, right? Like going into next year. After next season, he will be draft eligible. So when NFL teams are looking at Texas right now and evaluating the quarterback position, is it like, okay, we're going to focus on Quinn Ewers right now, and then we'll focus on Arch Manning, next year after he starts and see where he is? Or are people, focusing on Arch right now in the NFL and saying, yeah, Quinn is there, but Arch Manning might be that guy?
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma to have. And that's why they probably have the best quarterback room in America right now, is that you have the guy who a lot of people think could be QB1 next year in 2025. I'm personally a little bit lower on him. I think Ewers is probably QB3 for me, behind Carson Beck from Georgia and Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. But after that, Quinn Ewers is probably the next guy. And then the year after, you got Arch Manning, who, a little future scouting for 2026. There's a lot of people very high on him as well, even though he hasn't really played that much football. So it's going to be interesting when, one of the top quarterbacks in 2026 has been a backup his whole career going into his junior year, which is pretty rare, honestly. So again, it's a really interesting dilemma to have, but it's a good dilemma to have for Steve Sarkisian, in that, hey, if Quinn ever starts struggling or if he ever gets hurt, you got a very more than capable starting option in Arch Manning that a lot of other teams would kill for to have as their starting quarterback, and you have him as your backup quarterback. So that's a really good problem to have, I think, for Steve Sarkisian.
Yeah, you could probably count on your hand the teams and college football right now that wouldn't take Arch Manning potentially as their starting quarterback. So like you said, a great problem to have. We have to start with the quarterback position. The quarterbacks are the ones that move the needle. But overall, I think this Texas football team has talent at all 22 positions. When you look at them heading into 2024, heading into their first season in the SEC, what are your overall thoughts or expectations for this football team this year?
I think they're one of the top 5 teams in the country, probably. I really like a lot of what they did this offseason. They brought in some really talented players like Amari Niblack at tight end, obviously Isaiah Bond. They're entirely new receiving corps, basically. I think all 3 starting receivers would be transfers that are coming in as Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, and Silas Bolden from Oregon State, and Matthew Golden from Houston. So I really like that. I love Trey Moore, they got as well in the transfer portal. He's a really good, talented edge defender from UTSA. Edge Makuba is a really talented safety coming in from Clemson. So really murder the transfer portal. And they also have some really star players all over. I mean, the first one that comes to mind, obviously, is Kelvin Banks Jr., who I think could be a top 5 pick overall in the 2025 NFL draft. I think he's pretty clearly the best prospect that Texas has on their roster right now. He is a fantastic pass blocker and he's an inconsistent run blocker, but he's got high potential as a run blocker, as he's shown this past year. So CJ Baxter, I'm excited to see what you can do as a starting running back next year. Overall, I think Texas has a lot of star players on this team, and that's why I'm still think, even with all their losses to the NFL draft, they still are a top 5 team in the country heading into next year.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, roster-wise, they should be a top 5 team. I think they're positioned well to do that. Bijan came out and said whoever wins that, Georgia-Texas game likely is going to be the best team in the country, and I absolutely agree. Mammoth matchup on October 19th in Austin, Texas. Shifting to the NFL draft, the first player I want to ask you about is Adonai Mitchell, right? Texas had a historic weekend, and Adonai Mitchell was a part of that, right? One of 11 players drafted. You talk about transfer receivers. I mean, Adonai Mitchell came in and changed life for Texas Longhorn fans. And after the NFL Combine, you expected him to be a first-round lock, right? You saw, the play that he had on tape, right? He looked like a number 1 wide receiver. And then you go to the Combine and you measure in at 6'2", 208 pounds, and you run a 4.3, 4.40. To me, that looked like a future number 1 in the National Football League. But then these reports start coming out, right? We start hearing stuff about his diabetes. We start hearing stuff about, when he has low blood sugar, when he gets hangry, you know what I mean? Like, he might be tough to deal with, right? And so then we see him slip to, pick 52. He goes to the Colts, which I think is a great situation with Anthony Richardson and Michael Pittman there and Shane Steichen. But we saw Chris Ballard came out as the GM, right? And he straight up said, this is BS, right? Like, those reports were BS. He is a great kid. What's your take on everything with Adonai Mitchell, him slipping to, number 52 to the Colts, and the situation he went to? What was your take on that entire situation with Adonai Mitchell?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of BS with all the diabetes stuff and all. I hate all this draft talk that we get beforehand, because we start attacking kids' characters like that. And, for some kids that have never proven off the field that they have problems, it starts getting ridiculous. Like Caleb Williams is another one that comes to mind with that. But yeah, I thought it was a steal. I thought 52 overall was a steal. I mean, he was the number 22 player on our big board. Super high ceiling, honestly. Like you said, he's like 6'2", 208, can run a 4.3 40 basically. I really like his situation now in Indianapolis. I mean, you got him, you got Michael Pittman Jr. on the opposite side, you got Josh Downs in the slot. I mean, you got Anthony Richardson, and you got Shane Steichen calling out plays too, which is a really brilliant offensive mind in the sport. I think Adonai Mitchell, again, he's a little bit of a boomer bust player. I think there's sometimes where the route running, he's a great route runner, but I think there's sometimes where he kind of goes half speed on some routes, even on routes that he's targeted. So you got to clean that up a little bit. But otherwise, I think he's a terrific prospect that I would have taken easily in the top 25 of the draft. And him falling all the way to 52 overall was crazy to me. So I think Indianapolis got a great player at 52. I think that was a home run pick by them. And I'm really excited to see what he can do alongside Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs with Anthony Richardson next year. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch that Colts offense next year.
Yeah, it's really going to be a fun team to watch in Indy. And I forgot about Jonathan Taylor in the backfield. So they have a nice young offense to compete with the Texans, who are a nice young offense really for the next 5 to 10 years. You know what I mean? So it should be really fun in the AFC South. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we're going to talk more about the Texas Longhorns with Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. For my money, the best ticketing app in the industry. I can't tell you how many times living in Houston I've gone to Astros games for, damn near free, right? Using the Gametime app 2 hours before opening pitch. You get priority last minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Flash deals. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Zone deals. Save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats with all-in pricing. My favorite feature. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so the next player I want to talk to you about is T'Vondre Sweat. And I thought, T'Vondre Sweat coming into this draft process was somewhat of a polarizing player, right? You watched the tape. Obviously I watched every snap he took at the University of Texas. And this year he was dominant, right? Outland Trophy winner, best interior lineman, offensive or defensive. And, I tell people, like, when I watch the games, I'm watching the quarterback, right? I'm watching the skill positions. But I couldn't help but watch T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, right? And then Kelvin Banks, who you mentioned earlier, because those are just the type of players that jump off your screen, right? Those are the type of players that are making plays. But then, like you said, you get into this draft process and everybody starts nitpicking, right? And then now he's only a 2-down player, right? Now, he's going to be tough to manage his weight, right? Because I think he was already at 366 pounds weighing in at the pro day. So people are saying, how is he going to manage his weight? Can you trust him? Things like that. Starting to seem like he's slipping down boards. Then we have the DWI, right? About 2 weeks before the draft, and that plays a factor as well. So most people had him slip into the third, some people the fourth, but most people consensus, I think, had him a third-round pick going into the draft. And then the Tennessee Titans take him really early in the second at number 38. So, I saw mixed feelings about that pick. What are your thoughts about the Tennessee Titans taking T'Vondre Sweat at 38, and what type of player do you think he'll be in the National Football League?
Yeah, honestly, the only concerns I have with him are like you said, the off the field stuff. With the DWI, and then so the conditioning I heard is an issue sometimes as well. So other than that, he's a terrific football player. He was the best D tackle in the country this past year. So if you're just talking about on the field and how good he is, 38 overall is entirely where I would have probably taken him. But of course, the off the field stuff was why maybe a little bit later is where a lot of other people would have taken him. But great run defender, the best run defender in the country this past year. And then also, I think he adds more as a pass rusher than people give him credit for, honestly. Like, he actually pushed the pocket more than people realize for a guy that big. Usually you hear those 360-pound defensive tackles and you go, okay, they're just going to be run stuffers. And that's what he is, of course. But he can also push the pocket more than other, 360-pound nose tackles as well. So, yeah, T'Vondre Sweat, I really do like him a lot. And he even played some 3-tech for Texas this past year. And Byron Murphy played some nose, which is crazy considering the size difference between the two of them. That just shows how athletic he is as well. So, I like him a lot, and Tennessee needs a defensive tackle alongside Jeffrey Simmons. So I think he could serve as that role. But again, all the questions with him, to me, are just conditioning and off the field, and whether or not, you can trust him off the field. But if you can, he's a terrific football player, and he was the best D tackle in the country this past year. And Byron Murphy is probably the second best D tackle in the country this past year. I don't think 38 overall is that crazy when looking just at his on-field play. When you talk about the off-field stuff and the conditioning, then maybe that's when you start slipping to the third round and stuff. But on the field, I think 38 overall is entirely reasonable.
Yeah, I've always said about the draft, you can talk about Michael Penix Jr., you can talk about whoever. If you get a great player, it doesn't matter where you got him at the end of the day.
Right.
You know what I mean? So if he ends up being great, 38 was a steal. I want to talk about Byron Murphy and Jeffrey Simmons, because a lot of people felt like T'Vondre Sweat played his best football this year because he was next to Byron Murphy, kind of like an iron sharpens iron thing. Well, now he's going to be next to an all-pro in Jeffrey Simmons in Nashville. How do you think that will shape the early parts of T'Vondre Sweat's career?
Good. It's gonna be great. You want a vet, dude. You want a vet next to him. I think that not only will that help him on the field in terms of his development, but also like it can be like, hey, this is who you got to look at and say, okay, I got to model not only my game after, but my life after, and see what he's doing with his life, and that could be great for T'Vondre Sweat, who again has off the field concerns. That you could say, okay, if he has a vet to have as a mentor like Jeffrey Simmons, could work out great for T'Vondre Sweat. So I think it's a great thing to have in Tennessee is to have, that superstar vet next to him that you can, model and hopefully coaches will say, hey, T'Vondre, follow Jeffrey everywhere he goes. Everything he does, you do as well. So that could be great for him. And I think he could be, now again, on the field, be great for technique wise and become a better player, but off the field as well, get rid of those off field concerns. And yeah, I think T'Vondre Sweat, that could really help unlock him as a football player and as a person as well. So I'm really excited to see those two together in Tennessee, and I think it could be a great pairing for them.
Yeah, I think it's the second part you mentioned for me. Also, Keandre Coburn with the Tennessee Titans now as well. But yeah, I think the second part you mentioned for me is, just how to be a professional, right? Like when you're coming into the league, obviously you're a talented football player, but how to be a professional, how to put it all together, right? How to go through the day to day, how to eat right, attack meetings, different things like that. So, I thought you made a really good point there. I want to talk about Xavier Worthy next, right? The Buffalo Bills traded with the Kansas City Chiefs. A little bit of controversy there, but the Chiefs move up to 28 and take Xavier Worthy. And obviously just because of the speed and, what, Andy Reid has been able to do with some of the best speed receivers of all time, Xavier Worthy was talked about a lot to the Chiefs, before the draft. Didn't think it would actually happen, and it actually happened, right? So now he's in Kansas City. And when you look at the situation, obviously, even though he's a tight end, Travis Kelce is the number one pass catcher, the number one option. But when you look after that, there's some opportunity, right? Rashee Rice, there's rumblings that he's probably going to miss, a chunk of the season, right? I would be surprised if he didn't. Then you look at Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown, who's been inconsistent everywhere he's gone. Not sure if he's going to be, not sure how much. I don't even want to say that. He obviously is going to be in the rotation, but there's an opportunity for Xavier Worthy to come in and be the second or third option right away, is what I should say. So what do you expect from Xavier Worthy early on? Since, from day one, he could be Patrick Mahomes' number 2 option.
Yeah, I think it's hilarious that the Buffalo Bills traded that pick to the Kansas City Chiefs, because it's like that's the team you're directly competing with. And if I'm the Bills, I'm saying, all right, who are you getting? Like, tell me who you're getting, and that way until we trade the pick. And if they said Xavier Worthy, I'm probably like, oh, maybe I won't trade that pick then, because I don't know if I want to let you have that opportunity to do it. But I was a little lower on Worthy. I thought he was more of a second-round prospect. But if you go into the Chiefs, like that's the situation where I'm like, all right, it's worth it then probably. So I think it's great. The Chiefs have been desperate to find their Tyreek Hill replacement, and now you give them the fastest player in combine history, Xavier Worthy, running a 4.2 140. Obviously, he's a little lighter. He's 172 pounds. Obviously, going to put on a little bit of weight, hopefully. He had some drop issues at Texas as well, but as a deep threat man with Patrick Mahomes, I think I love it. And with Andy Reid drawing up plays for him as well, I think it's a really aggressive move by the Chiefs, and I really love it as well. And obviously, with Travis Kelce there, who's one of the greatest tight ends of all time, and then you have Rashee Rice, hopefully eventually on the field as well. It's kind of like an underneath and intermediate option. And you have Worthy, you can take the top off the defense, and also Worthy's a lot better after the catch than he's given credit for, I think, as well. He was terrific as a true freshman in that regard a few years ago. But yeah, I love the fit there in Kansas City. I think that's exactly what they were looking for in that receiving core, finding another speed option. And Xavier Worthy, if you're looking for a speed option, there is no faster speed option than Xavier Worthy. So they're looking for the Tyreek Hill replacement. I'm not going to say it's going to be as good as Tyreek Hill, who's a top 2 or 3 receiver in the league. But I think that if they're looking for speed, they definitely got in Xavier Worthy. So I'm really excited to see that fit in Kansas City.
Yeah, I think some of those concerns with Xavier Worthy and the drops had a lot to do with the hand injury his sophomore year. But I do think, at the next level in the NFL, with him being slider, like you said, 165, 172, we've seen players at that size. Zay Flowers is a little bit bigger, but, he plays way bigger than his size. Same thing with DeVonta Smith. I think Xavier Worthy is going to have to answer questions at the next level about his ability to play through contact. But you talked about the comparisons between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills, or how they're just tied together, right? Because of the quarterbacks, because the Buffalo Bills, ended up making the trade that netted, Patrick Mahomes for the Chiefs. So, they're just tied together, right? They're in each other's stories. And like I said, the comparisons are always going to be there between Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. But now because of this situation, the Buffalo Bills trading back, but drafting Keon Coleman out of Florida State, I think Keon Coleman and Xavier Worthy will be compared for the rest of their careers. So, as of all of the information you have now, how do you view Keon Coleman and Xavier Worthy in terms of comparison to each other?
Yeah, 2 completely different receivers, honestly. I think they're both second-round prospects because Worthy, like I said, the slight frame is something that was, and playing through contact is something that was a little concerning to me. And obviously, the hand injury played to the drops, but also you want to pick up those drops as well. Coleman is just because he's a little bit slow. He's a kind of an opposite player to Xavier Worthy, where he goes up and gets him, and he plays through contact. He's a strong receiver. The problem is his speed. He runs like a 4.6 40, and the separation ability. He's not a great separator either. So whereas Worthy, obviously, with that speed and explosiveness, is a very good separator. He runs away from DBs. So they're really 2 completely opposite receivers. So I think I would have preferred Keon Coleman. Not for the Chiefs. Worthy makes a lot of sense. So team fit matters there. But I like Keon Coleman a little bit better as a prospect. But I thought they're both second-round picks. But yeah, if you're talking about just receiver prospects, it's hard to compare those two because it's like these are 2 completely different players and really like polar opposite receivers as well. So I think they will be compared for the rest of their careers because of the ties with Buffalo and Kansas City and the fact that those two teams are probably going to be playing in the AFC Championship game for years to come, probably. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how those two do in their careers. But I like the fit for both of them. I like Keon Coleman in Buffalo, and I like Xavier Worthy in Kansas City. But they were both players I probably would have been more comfortable spending maybe a second-round pick on than a first-round pick.
Sounds good. And I don't know where you rank Keon Coleman or however you feel about him, just anybody. But, what I do know is he's probably the funniest player in the draft based on everything
Hilarious.
I've seen that's came out since he got drafted. I mean, that man is hilarious, right? And just so genuine from Louisiana. So love Keon Coleman. Hope they both do well, obviously, in Buffalo and Kansas City, respectively. A quick word from our sponsors. And we're going to talk about Jonathan Brooks, JT Sanders, and then get out of here with Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. With unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. All right, Max. So when you look at it, the Carolina Panthers, who drafted Bryce Young first overall last year, they're trying to build around him, and they doubled up on Texas Longhorn players in this draft, right? They took Jonathan Brooks as the first running back, I believe, second-round pick, 46th overall, and then they took Jatavian Sanders in the fourth round, who probably slipped because of the slow 40 time and the 8 reps at the pro day, right? Which is just insane, especially when Keelan Robinson at that same pro day lifted more than 20, right? So what are your thoughts on what Jatavian Sanders and Jonathan Brooks can bring to that Carolina offense that they're trying to build around Bryce Young?
I'm a big fan of it. I think Carolina needs to build around Bryce Young. You mentioned it perfectly. I think that's the exact thing you got to do because now you're trying to figure out whether or not he can be the franchise quarterback, and you can't figure that out if you have the same supporting cast you had last year because it was terrible last year. So getting a running back in Jonathan Brooks that you can rely on the run game so it's not all on Bryce Young's shoulders. They obviously really needed running back last year. Miles Sanders wasn't getting it done for them at all. And then JT Sanders, I was surprised he fell to the fourth round. Yeah, I know his whole game was centered around his athleticism, obviously former 5-star recruit, but and he tested pretty average at the combine, let's put it that way. I was a little surprised by that, but I thought he was the second best tight end in the draft. I still would have taken him probably in the second round. So getting him in the fourth round was a steal for Carolina, and I think will be their top tight end immediately for them. So big fan of both those picks, and it makes a lot of sense when you're trying to build around Bryce Young. So yeah, I thought the Panthers did a pretty solid job of getting some weapons around Bryce Young, just help him out, and that way you could see, all right, whether or not the number one overall pick can actually be your franchise quarterback, or do you go into the 2025 draft or maybe even 2026 draft and say, all right, we got to find a new quarterback. So you can't really figure that out unless you have a better supporting cast. And then Carolina did a pretty solid job of getting a better supporting cast around Bryce Young this offseason.
Yeah, speaking of receivers, I'm embarrassed to admit how much, Xavier Legette and Keon Coleman content I've watched over the last week. You talk about Keon Coleman, how funny he is. And obviously Xavier Legette probably has the best accent in the National Football League now, covered for rural South Carolina. So, you talked about Carolina. They did an exceptional job, obviously taking 2 Longhorns, but, getting Xavier Legette in the first round as well. Hopefully, I'm a huge fan of Bryce Young, and hopefully these are the pieces he needs to prove that he's a franchise quarterback moving forward. Last question for you, Max. The Texas Longhorns made history over the weekend. 11 Longhorns drafted in a 7-round draft, their most ever, and their most since 2007, where they had 7 players drafted in a 7-round draft. This is amazing, coming from just 2 years ago where only 2 players were invited to the NFL Combine, 0 drafted. This year, 11 invited to the Combine, all 11 drafted. Based on what you've seen, what you know at this point, right? I'm asking you to make a hell of a projection right now. Out of the 11 Texas Longhorn players that were drafted, which one do you see having the best career with the information you have right now?
Ooh, good question. All right, I'm going to give you the cop-out answer, and I'll probably give you a better answer after that. So the cop-out answer is Byron Murphy. I think that guy is a superstar. I think he is a terrific pass rusher, obviously being the only one that went in the first round. It makes sense that you would say, oh, the guy who went in the first round is going to be the best one. So I would say Byron Murphy is one of them. 2 of them went in the first round, but he was the first one taken. But the next one after that, I really think Jonathan Brooks is going to be a starting running back and a really good one at that in the league as well. I thought obviously the torn ACL is probably the biggest question mark with him right now, but he's got everything else you'd want in a star running back prospect. Size, agility, strength, speed, tackle breaking ability. I really like him a lot, man. And it was kind of crazy that he was the number 3 running back in that backfield just a year ago behind Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson, who I also loved. They're quickly kind of becoming RBU right now. I'm sure we'll talk about CJ Baxter in the 2026 NFL draft in a couple years as well as maybe the potential RB1 in that draft. But yeah, I think Jonathan Brooks is another guy that I'm really excited to see what he can do in Carolina. I think he's going to be a pretty good number 1 running back in the league for a long time, probably.
Yeah, and I think you're going to be talking about Jaden Blue in next year's draft, who I think is the fastest, running back in college football right now. But yeah, I've just been getting your opinion, but I agree on that. If I had to pick one player out of the 11 from this draft class that I say will be a future All-Pro, will be in the conversation for, best player at that position in the National Football League, I think you got to go with Jonathan Brooks, right? And who knows where he goes or, what awards he wins if he doesn't tear his ACL against TCU. So just such a great season last year. You talked about him sitting behind, Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. That was justified. Him not starting the first 2 games of this past season, that was not justified, but he certainly made up for it in the next 8. So, Max, I appreciate you coming on from Pro Football Focus. Let them know where they can find your work and what you're currently working on until football gets cranked up, back up.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find it all at pff.com. Also, where all my articles live. I also host the PFF College Football Show, which you can find on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Max Chadwick CFB. And yeah, we're doing a lot of stuff right now. We just put out a way too early 2025 NFL mock draft with a couple Longhorns who are in that mock draft as well. In Kelvin Banks Jr., who's a top 10 pick, and Quinn Ewers, who's a later in the first round pick as well. Yeah, I got a lot going on right now in terms of ranking every position in college football, top 10 players at every position, previewing every team in college football pretty much. We're doing a lot from now until August, basically. So it's going to be a very busy 3 or 4 months for us before college football season. And obviously, once we get into the college football season, we'll be cranked up to 11 as well with how many changes are coming this year. So I'm really excited for this offseason. And yeah, check us out at PFF College Football Show and on pff.com.
Yeah, super shout out to Pro Football Focus. This is the second time we've had him on the podcast. And, of course, shout out to Max Chadwick. And, of course, shout out to Trevor Sycamore. Just straight gems, right, from both of them on the podcast. And really appreciate you, Max. I know everybody, that listen to this Longhorn fan or not, they're going to appreciate everything you dropped on this podcast today. For my Longhorn fans, hook 'em. Peace.